a context which we are going to return, and then we're going to have sign up page here. Simple. The standard way to navigate from one to is the route dot push, then we pass in the context and then the route. For the route, we're going to pass in material page route. The builder is going to have a context which we're going to return, and then we're going to have sign up page here. Simple. The standard way to navigate from one page to another. I'm going to copy the statement, then go to the sign up page and wrap this rich text with a gesture detector as well and do the same thing. I'll add an on tap, and then we have a, for the route, we're going to pass in, then we pass in the context and then the route. For the route, we're going to pass in material page route. The builder is going to have a context which we're going to return, and then we're going to have sign up page here. Simple. The standard way to navigate from one page to another. I'm going to copy the statement, then go to the sign up page and wrap this rich text with a gesture detector as well and do the same thing. I'll add an on tap and then push from the sign up page to the login page. Now I can restart the entire app. Now when I click on the sign in text, it goes to the sign in page, and you can keep doing that. You see we get a back button over here, which is why we added an app bar. It allows us to navigate freely. So let's go to the login page here and pass in rivan@gmail.com. Password is going to be test123, I guess. Then I'll click on sign in. Then I'm going to press Command J, and you see it gives me the email, password, ID, and the name. And the status here is 200 because we're not creating any new user. We are simply returning the user from our database if the user successfully logs in. What if I pass in the wrong password and then click on sign in? It should be giving us an error, and it does. Incorrect password. Status code 400. So that's looking good for us. But what if we make an error, or let's say our server is temporarily down? In that case, what's going to happen? Well, if I open my debug console and click on the sign in button, it says unhandled exception, client exception with socket exception, connection refused. So basically, our app is kind of crashing because we have not handled an exception. If our server is down, the app is not going to work, and it might potentially crash, giving a bad user experience. So I don't want that to happen, right? So how do I handle this exception? Well, to do that, you simply need to go to auth remote repository and wrap the calls that you made here with a try and a catch block. Usually, when you're communicating with external services, you should be putting try and catch blocks. So I'll copy all of this, put it in try block, and I'll catch any exception if it's present and print it for now. Later on, we are going to see a more effective way of handling all of this. But for now, let's just print it. And the same goes for the sign up function. I'm going to do try, catch, E, and then I'm going to copy all of this, paste it over here, and then print E. This way, if I open my terminal again, restart the entire application, let's say I put in some stuff, and then click on sign up, it says client exception with socket exception. So the same error message, but we have handled this exception now. This is being printed because we put a print E over here. So I hope that was clear. And for those wondering, why have we created a separate repository file, a separate view file, and a separate view model file? The reason is that if I wrote all the repository code in the sign up page, what would happen? You saw here that we needed to put a try and catch block inside of our sign up and login functions. If I had put all of this code, all the server related logic in the sign up page and the login page, I would have to go to two different files, edit both of those functions to have a try and catch block. But now, since I've written all of the code inside of this repository class, all I need to do is go to this auth remote repository and edit just one file, which makes it to this all edit and the login page. I would have to go to two different files, edit both of those functions all of this code, all the server related, if I wrote all the repository code in the sign up page, what would happen? You saw here that we needed to put a try and catch block inside of our sign up and login functions. If I had put all of this code, all the server related logic in the sign up page and the login page, I would have to go to two different files, edit both of those functions to have a try and catch block. But now, since I've written all of the code inside of this repository class, all I need to do is go to this auth remote repository and edit just one file, which makes it easier for me as an engineer. Another reason is that if you bind the server related logic with the UI related logic, it's not very scalable code. For example, in the future, you might want to change the UI of the login and sign up pages. Once you have to do that, there is a possibility that by mistake, you edit some code that was written for the server related logic. And then the server related logic also fails. And you don't want that, do you? That's why you create two separate files and two separate classes so that you can handle each task as its own. And when you have multiple engineers, let's say engineer 1 and 2 can work on the UI, while simultaneously engineer 3 and 4 can work on the backend logic. All the 4 engineers are not working on just one single file in just one single class, and that makes the code scalable. I hope you understood this. If you have, let's move further. Our response.body and response.status code, along with error messages, if there are, printing in the terminal. We obviously don't want that. If there is an error, I want the UI to display that error message. If it's a success, then I want to move from one page to another. For example, if I'm on sign up page and the user signs up successfully, I want to automatically move to the login page asking the user that, hey, the account has been created, please log in. And if the user logs in successfully, I automatically want to move them to the home page. For that, there are multiple changes we need to make in the code. For example, first of all, you'll see here we are returning a future void sign up. This doesn't have to be void. Instead, we have to return something from here. And as of now, our response body is a string, but it's returning a JSON to us, right? Because here, when we return user DB, it's returning a JSON. So I need to convert that JSON to a map. So the return type here should be a map, right? Well, as of now, we can put map, but later on, we're going to change it to one of our data classes, the thing that we're going to put in model here. But for now, let's go step by step and change this from void to map. And we're not going to change the login as of now. Let's just work on the sign up function. So the first thing I need to do is convert this response.body into a map. But here's the problem. If the status code is 201, then I need to convert from JSON to a map because then I know user details are coming. But what if it is status code 400? That means the user email already exists. In that scenario, I don't want to return under the impression that, hey, the user details are coming. No, in that scenario, we need to throw an error because it is something the user should know. So response.status code is going to play a big part here. So I'm going to put an if condition saying if response.status code is equal to 201, then it's a success. But if it is not equal to 201, in that scenario, it's going to give an error similar to this catch block. So let's assume the response.status code, if it's not equal to 201, we have handled the error. Okay. But what if the status code is 201? In that scenario, I need to convert the response.body to a map. And to do that, we can simply do JSON decode. So this accepts the string. So my string is going to be response.body. And I'm going to store it in the variable. Let's call this user. This user, if you hover over this, is of the type dynamic. To treat it as a map, because I'm sure it is going to be a map, I can explicitly say here as map of string comma dynamic. And this way, when I return user from here, it won't complain. But the signup function error remains here, and that's because in the if condition, we have to return a map because that's how functions work. So I can simply do throw as of now, and even in the catch block, I can simply do throw, and the error goes away. We'll look into this in just a bit, but for now, I'll go to the sign up page. Then I'll scroll down, and whatever response I get here, I'm going to store it in the response variable and print it over here just to see if you're getting the right thing. So I'm going to restart my app and also restart the server. Now I can come back here on the sign up page. Then I'm going to say my name is test. The email is test123 at the rate gmail.com. Password is test1234. Click on sign up. And you see we get email, name, everything showing up because of this res variable. So we have res in the form of map string comma dynamic. That means whatever we wanted is successful. So we can go back to auth remote repository and look into the error handling part. Now, if the error occurs, let's say 201, it will throw an exception. And if it throws an exception over here, what is going to happen? Let's understand it. I'm going to click on sign up again because this time it should be giving an error. The user is already registered. So let's click on sign up and you see we get an unhandled exception error. Why? Because we go in this if condition where an error is being thrown. So that means we directly go to the catch block. And in this catch block also, we are throwing the error. If you're throwing the error, it means that in the sign up page, we need a try and catch block. Wherever this sign up function is called, we need to wrap it with a try and catch block. And we have not done that because of which we are getting unhandled exception. Does that mean whenever I use await, I need to use try and catch block? That's quite exhausting, don't you think? Another thing is this function throws an error. But let's say there might be something like a login user function, and that is not throwing any error. But since this is of the type of future void, and in the login page, I am using await auth repository.login, I'll again put try and catch block here, and that is basically useless because we're not throwing any error from here. My point is that our function return type doesn't suggest what error is going to be thrown, and that can cause some problems. So to fix that, what we are going to do is add the fp.dart package. Fp.dart package allows us to write functional programming code in Dart. So I'm simply going to copy this code because I'm using the pre-release version. I'm not using the latest version. Then go to the pubspec.yaml file, paste it over here, save it, and then edit my return type here from only displaying the success value to displaying the return type for failure and success. What I mean is I'm going to remove map string comma dynamic from here. The future is going to be there because it's an async function. Then here I'm going to pass in either, which is coming from the fp.dart package. Make sure you import that. And then first thing we need to put in here is what should happen in case of a failure. What should be the return type? For now, let's just put in a string. And for the success, what I want is the map string comma dynamic. So we are saying that this is a function which is asynchronous, and it can either return a failure, and in case of failure, we return a string, or a success, and in case of success, we return a map of string comma dynamic. Now, if I go down in the code, you'll see it gives an error here, and it gives an error because we're returning map string comma dynamic, but we cannot directly do that. Instead, what we need to do is, if it's a success, you want to return right over here, this particular thing, and then the value should be a map because at the top we have defined that in case of success, that is the right value, we want map to be returned. So I'll pass in user here and it looks good. In case of error, however, we don't. have to throw anymore. We can simply do return left. And then we again pass in the value. So the value as of now is going to be response.body, but we are going to modify that a little bit. And in the catch block also, we are going to have return left, and then we're going to have e.toString. So in case of error, we return left. In case of success, I return right. And if we return left, we need to pass in a string. If we return right, we have to return a map. So I hope that was clear. Now we can go to the sign up page, and if we hover over res, it says it is of the type either string, comma map, string, comma dynamic. And if I open the terminal, click on sign up, you see the response is now left with the detail user with the same email already exists. And if it's a success, let's create another user here. Click on sign up. It says right with the user details present. You might ask, what's the benefit over here? It's just wrapping it with left and right. The benefit is that I don't have to wrap it with a try and catch block anymore. And also my function directly tells me what's going to happen in case of error and what's going to happen in case of success. So it's easier for me to understand what to do in one scenario. Now, if you notice, the type of this result variable is either string, comma map, string, comma dynamic. To extract the failure or the success value, what I can do is use Dart's pattern matching feature. That was introduced in Dart 3. If you want to know more about it, you can watch the video that's mentioned in the description or in the cards attached. But basically, to go about it, we can simply do something like final. Let's call this variable val, and then we will set it equal to the switch case expression. And this switch will have the result variable passed to it. Then we can do that in case of a left value, we're going to get a value which we'll store in the variable L, and we're going to return L directly because it's going to be a string. And in case of a success, it's right. So we're going to take that value, store it in the variable R, and then return R.toString. Okay. Then I'll put a semicolon. And print the value of val. So what have we done over here? We set the variable equal to a switch case scenario, and the result variable can have two types, right? It can either be a left value or a right value. In case of a left value, we store that in the L variable and return that variable directly because it is a string, as you can see over here. And in case of a right value, we're storing it in the R variable and calling the R.toString method, so that val is of the type string. If I don't return a string and just return R, you'll notice that the type of val is object, because here we are returning a string and here we are returning a map. And this way, we are resolving both of these left and right values. If I open the terminal now, click on sign up, you see we directly get a map saying detail user with the same email already exists. This way, we've resolved the left and right values here, and that's the way to go about it. If you've used FP Dart in previous versions, we're basically doing res.fold over here, but the fold option no more exists, so we're using the Dart pattern matching feature. So I hope you understood this. Now what I want to do is change the return values for the failure and success. Now what I want to do is change the return type of this failure and success. So for the failure, instead of returning a string, I want to return a failure class. Why? Because if I return a string, I can literally pass in anything, and other engineers working on the same code as ours will literally put in anything. They don't know what to put here. So I'll be more specific, and what I'm going to do is go to the Explorer. In the core folder, I'm going to create a new folder called failure, and in this failure, I'm going to create a new class called fail. So it's easier for me to understand what to do in one scenario. Now, if you notice, the type of this result variable is either string, comma map, string, comma dynamic. To extract the failure or the success value, what I can do is use Dart's pattern matching feature. That was introduced in Dart 3. If you want to know more about it, you can watch the video that's mentioned in the description or in the cards attached. But basically, to go about it, we can simply do something like final. Let's call this variable val, and then we will set it equal to the switch case expression, and this switch will have the result variable passed to it. Then we can do that in case of a left value, we are going to get a value which we'll store in the variable L, and we are going to return L directly because it's going to be a string. And in case of a success, it's right. So we are going to take that value, store it in the variable R, and then return R dot to string. Okay. Then I'll put a semicolon here and print the value of val. So what have we done over here? We have set the variable equal to a switch case scenario, and the result variable can have two types, right? It can either be a left value or a right value. In case of a left value, we store that in the L variable and return that variable directly because it is a string, as you can see over here. And in case of a right value, we're storing it in the R variable and calling the R.toString method, so that val is of the type string. If I don't return a string and just return R, you'll notice that the type of val is object, because here we are returning a string and here we are returning a map. And this way, we are resolving both of these left and right values. If I open the terminal now, click on sign up, you see, we directly get a map saying detail user with the same email already exists. This way, we've resolved the left and right values here, and that's the way to go about it. If you've used FP Dart in previous versions, we're basically doing res.fold over here, but the fold option no more exists, so we're using the Dart pattern matching feature. So I hope you understood this. Now what I want to do is change the return values for the failure and the success. The Dart and what's going to happen in case of error and what's going to happen in case of success. So it's easier for me to understand what to do in one scenario. Now, if you notice, the type of this result variable is either string, comma map string, comma dynamic. To extract the failure or the success value, what I can do is use Dart's pattern matching feature. That was introduced in Dart 3. If you want to know more about it, you can watch the video that's mentioned in the variable is either string, comma map string, comma dynamic. To extract the failure or the success value, what I can do is use Dart's pattern matching feature. That was introduced in Dart 3. If you want to know more about it, you can watch the video that's mentioned in the description or in the cards attached. But basically, to go about it, we can simply do something like final, let's call this variable val, and then we will set it equal to the switch case expression, and this switch will have the result variable passed to it. Then we can do that in case of a left value, we are going to get a value which we'll store in the variable L, and we are going to return L directly because it's going to be a string. And in case of a table, we keep find or used in string. To more about it, you can watch the video about it. We can, and then we something like function or in the cards attached. But basically, to go about it, we can simply do something like final, let's call this variable val, and then we will set it equal to the switch case expression, and this switch will have the result variable passed to it. Then we can do that in case of a left value, we are going to get a value which we'll store in the variable L, and we are going to return L directly because it's going to be a string. And in case of a success, it's right. So we are going to take that value, store it in the variable R, and then return R dot to string. Okay. Then I'll put a semicolon here and print the value of val. So what have we done over here? We have set the variable equal to a switch case scenario, and the result variable can have two types, right? It can either be a left value or a right value. In case of a left value, we store that in the L variable and return that variable directly because it is a string, as you can see over here. And in case of a right value, we're storing it in the R variable and calling the R.toString method, so that val is of the type string. If I don't return a string and just return R, you'll notice that the type of val is object, because here we are returning a string and here we are returning a map. And this way, we are resolving both of these left and right values. If I open the terminal now, click on sign up, you see, we directly get a map saying detail user with the same email already exists. This way, we have resolved the left and right values here, and that's the way to go about it. If you've used FP Dart in previous versions, we are basically doing res.fold over here, but the fold option no more exists, so we are using the Dart pattern matching feature. So I hope you understood this. Now what I want to do is change the return values for the failure and the success. Now what I want to do is change the return type of this failure and success. So for the failure, instead of returning a string, I want to return a failure class. Why? Because if I return a string, I can literally pass in anything, and other engineers working on the same code as ours will literally put in anything. They don't know what to put here. So I'll be more specific, and what I'm going to do is go to the Explorer. In the core folder, I'm going to create a new folder called failure, and in this failure, I'm going to create a new class called failure.dart. In this failure file, I'm going to create a new class called failure, and then it is going to have one argument, which is the message, the error message. And then I'll create a constructor where this message is going to come from. Now, if you want, you can put in a default message saying, sorry, an unexpected error occurred. So if the user just passes in the instance of failure class, this message shows up. Otherwise, we'll explicitly set the message using the constructor. Now, why is this failure class needed instead of a string? Well, that's because this failure class can accommodate much more than just a simple string. If you want to put a status code as well, you can put over here. So you can take in a message and the status code. If you want the stack trace to be present, you can ask from the constructor again. But for now, we're just going to have a simple failure class. Again, if you want to put in more attributes and fields, you can do so in this failure class, which makes it scalable. Now coming back to the auth remote repository, instead of returning a string, I'm going to return a failure. And I hope you understood why I've created the failure.dart file inside of core. That's because this failure file or the failure class is going to be used across multiple features in auth, even in home. Now, what about this map string comma dynamic? Now, the problem with map in our scenario is that if I want to access one particular thing of the user model, I have to do something like user, and then I have to spell it out correctly. For example, name or email like this. And this is quite error prone because there is a possibility I'm going to misspell password by typing in password like this, and it would crash my application. That's how easy it is to get an error with the map. So what I want to do is create a data class for this, so that in my Flutter application, I don't return a map. Instead, I return a user model or a user data class that will encapsulate all those values. So to create this data class, I'll go to the Explorer, and in this model, I'm going to create the user underscore model.dart file. So these data classes are also known as models in our application. And in the MVVM structure, model contains repositories and the data classes that you create. Both of them are considered a part of model, but I've created separate folders for it because I don't want to confuse the data classes that we create with the repositories. Now let's understand these data classes in a bit more detail. What is a data class? As the name suggests, it is a class that can hold data. Okay, that's what data classes are. So what I'm going to do is create a class, let's call it user or user model, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm going to describe the properties that are a part of user. And we've seen that already. Our user is going to have email, ID, password, name. Now, if you want, you can store password in this user model class, but I don't see a point in storing that because this password is hashed anyways. And what good is it going to do us to store our password in a user model class? So I'm just going to create name, email, ID, fields as of now, but later on in our application, we're going to have one or two more fields. The next thing we need is a constructor for it. So to create a constructor, what I can do is simply click on this bulb icon and add generate constructor quick fix. Once I do that, it automatically adds the constructor for me. So this way, whenever I instantiate a user model class, I have to pass in the name, email, and ID of the user. Awesome. Now that I have the user model class created, I can go back to auth remote repository, and instead of returning a map, I'm going to return a user model, and make sure to import the user model from the auth/model user model.dart file. Now let's resolve the errors. So instead of returning left response.body, which is a string, I need to wrap this response.body with a failure, right? But if I do failure response.body, the error message is not going to look pretty because response.body is in the format of a JSON. So it's saying detail and then the error message, right? And if I simply return failure response.body, it is going to return this particular thing, and I don't want that. Instead, I want to return this error message string. So I need to go inside of this JSON, access the detail property, and then pass it to the failure. To do that, again, I'll have to decode this JSON and convert it into a map format. So instead of doing the JSON decode over here, I'm going to put it at the top. And this variable can be renamed to response body map. Then I can take this map, and if the status code is not 201, that means some error has occurred. So I'm going to pass the response body map over here, followed by the square brackets where I pass in the detail. In the catch block, when we return left, I can do a similar thing. I can do failure e, and this time I can simply call failure e.toString. I don't have to do anything else. And one problem I notice over here is I'm returning failure from the fp.dart package. I don't want that. Instead, I want the failure to come from the failure.dart file that I created. So for that to work and not cause any future confusion, what I'm going to do is name this class as app failure, not just failure. And then coming back to auth remote repository, I'm going to pass an app failure, import the failure.dart file. Then again over here, I'm going to return app failure. And even over here, I'm going to return app failure. I hope that made sense. The only issue was failure was present in our failure.dart file and the fp.dart package. All right, coming back to returning right user, here we need to pass in the user model. Now, how do I convert this map into a user model. For that, I can simply pass in the user model instance and then pass in the name, email, which we are getting from the parameter of the function. And for the ID, I can access response body map at ID. Because if the status code is 201, we are getting a user response, and the ID of the user can be accessed like this. But the only problem with this approach is that if there are multiple fields, for example, password, which is in a hash format, I'll have to do response body map password. If there's several other fields, like let's say 4 or 5 more fields, I'll have to manually pass the name over here. Okay, that doesn't sound too bad. Well, the bigger problem comes in when I have to do the same thing for the login, because even over here, when I get the user model, I want to convert it from map into a user model data class. And again, I'll have to spell all of this correctly. So first of all, there is repetition of code. And whenever there's repetition of code, it means there's a likelihood of more error. And in our case, it is typo error. Basically, I spell password incorrectly, or the same issues I mentioned earlier. Now, instead of doing that, is there a better way? Yep, there is. If I go to the user model class, I can create a function over here that converts a map into a user model class and then returns that class. How do I do that? Well, you can write it from scratch, or what you can do is go to the extensions tab, then search for the data class generator extension. There are multiple versions of it. This is the one I use, the one with the most number of downloads. And once you install that, you can click on this bulb icon and it will give you multiple options, like generating a data class, which is exactly what I want to do. So I'll click on generate data class and it adds a bunch of code. We're going to go through it. But first, I'm going to remove this comment that's present. So first of all, it imports Dart convert. It imports Dart convert because below we've used the function that is JSON.encode, and this JSON is coming from the Dart convert package. But anyways, we understand the code till here. We have 3 fields and we are taking it from the constructor. Then we have a copy with function. What does this copy with function do? Well, here's the thing. In our user model class, all of our fields are final. And if we want to change one of the fields, I cannot change that after the user model is created. Instead, what I'll have to do is call the copy with function. What it will do is create a new user model class with all the same properties. And if you want to change any particular field, you can add it over here and it will replace that. We are going to see a live demo of how to use copy with in the next section of the tutorial where we are persisting auth state. The next function is toMap. So if we want to convert a user model into a map format, we can use this technique. So what it does is return a map with the name, email, ID property, and the value is this name, email, and ID that are coming from the constructor when we create an instance of user model. Then we have a factory function of user model.fromMap. And this is the function we'll be using over here to convert from map to a user model. So it takes in a map and then it returns a new user model instance where the name is map at name. The email is map at email and ID is map at ID. And that's exactly what we're getting in the map. When the response of user is returned, that means 201 status code is present. The map follows a similar structure as this one. And here we're also telling it to treat it as a string. Alternatively, what we can do is null handling. Basically, there is a possibility that this name is null. In that scenario, I can put in 2 question mark followed by a single inverted comma. So it means that if map at name is null, take in an empty string, otherwise map at name is fine. The same goes for email. If map at email is null, then take in an empty string, otherwise map at email value is fine. Then the same for ID. Then we have toJSON and fromJSON functions. toJSON basically encodes our map in JSON format. If we go to the auth remote repository, here when we do JSON encode, we are converting the map into JSON, and JSON is basically a string in Flutter application. If you see, the return value is string for this encode function. You can use JSON.encode or JSON encode. It's going to be the same thing. But let's just go ahead with whatever Dart data class generator extension has created for us. Then we have user model.fromJSON. You pass in a JSON and it will automatically convert it from a string JSON source into a map. And to do that, you can see how it does it. First, it calls the JSON decode function and it treats it as a map string comma dynamic. That's what we've done over here when we converted from JSON into a map. That's the thing we used. Then, since we already have access to a map, we are calling the user model.fromMap function so that we return a user model. Then we have the toString functionality, because if you try to print user model without this override, it's going to print out instance of user model, and we don't want that. So I've overridden the toString functionality. So whenever you call user model.toString or you try to print the user model, it prints out this particular thing, user model with the name, email, and ID of the user. Then we have equal to and hash code properties that help us check if two instances of user model class are the same thing or not. For example, if I have user model instance one is equal. to user model instance 2, it's going to return false to me. Why? Because Dart is checking if they are the same instance. But what I want to check is if the fields of both of them are the same thing or not. So we use operator equal to over here, and we're saying that the other user model is going to be equal to this user model if the other dot name is equal to name, other dot email is equal to this email, and other dot ID is equal to this ID. If you don't understand this, don't worry about it too much. It's not valid for this tutorial. We won't be using operator equal to that often, or I think at all. So let's come back to auth remote repository. And now, instead of creating a new user model instance like this, we are going to do user model dot from JSON or from map. You can do either of them, because if you pass in from JSON, you can pass in response dot body, and behind the scenes, it is going to call the JSON decode function and convert it from map, or you can directly do user model dot from map, because you already have the response body map present over here. So let me put that in, and there we go. So this is our function now. What I'm going to do is go to the sign up page, see everything is correctly put or not, then going to restart the app, and let's put the sign up as test, then test1223@gmail.com, password test1234, click on sign up, open the terminal, and it says instance of app failure. That's because here I've returned L and there is no string overriding present over here. So let me create that. I'll click on the bulb icon, then I'll create generate toString method. So it has that. It will display the message now. Then I'll open the console again, click on sign up, and it says app failure message, user with the same email already exists. That's great. Now, if I pass in test12234@gmail.com, again, the same email already exists. Let me create another user, click on sign up, and we get a user model with the name as test, this email, and this ID. Everything seems to be working fine. And now, the advantage of using user model here is I can simply do r.email or r.name, and I get access to the user's name. I don't have to worry about misspelling anything. And also, user models give us autocomplete, and that's a nice feature. So overall, working with classes and data classes becomes so much easier than working with maps. And this is why we converted from map to a data class. I hope that makes sense. And now we are done with the sign up route. The next thing I want to do is convert the login function to a similar thing as sign up function. So here I'm going to have future either, and then I'm again going to return a failure, and again sign up function. The next thing I want to do is convert the login function to a similar thing as sign up function. So here I'm going to have future either, and then I'm again going to return a failure, and again a user model as the success. Very similar to this thing over here. And I almost made the same mistake. I don't want to return failure. Instead, it should be app failure. Then in the try block, when we print, I don't want to print anything. Here, I'm going to check if response.status code is not equal to 200, not 201. Login is going to return 200. In that scenario, I want to return left with the failure message, where I'm going to return app failure with the message. And for that, again, I'll have to convert from JSON into a map. So I'm just going to copy this particular line, paste it down,